Good afternoon. One of the unexpected privileges of a conversation with Dick Briotta was that you often ended up revealing something about yourself that you hadn't intended to. His skillful way of drawing you into conversation always left you feeling exposed, but in a good way. In that spirit, let me begin by sharing 4 things you may not know about me. First, I am a weeper. Just like Jude Law in The Holiday, I am a major weeper. Second, I speak fluently in movie quotes, with an occasional reference or two to the TV show Friends. Third, I have never considered myself a leader, and I have struggled to find my footing in leadership roles. And finally, growing up, there were 2 things I was really good at: sports and school. Those talents came together in my choice to pursue sports psychology as a profession and continue to be an avocation, if not a vocation. With no fewer than 200,000 books written on the subject of leadership and about 6,000 on leadership in sport, the subject of this talk is not exactly new. The perspective I wanted to explore, though, was how my experiences as a student athlete and as a coach influenced my leadership approach. These confessions are as much a part of my leadership as are any specific experiences or trainings that I've benefited from. Leadership is a part of my career, but I didn't understand or perhaps accept until recently that I have an opportunity and a responsibility to make leadership my own. William Shakespeare is credited with saying, "Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them." I thought the same held true for leadership and counted myself among those who had leadership thrust upon me. The struggle to find my footing in leadership roles was my self-described Achilles heel, pun intended. This talk gives me the opportunity to draw some connections among seemingly disparate parts of who I am: the sport-loving, movie line quoting, reluctant leader. In that way, the more descriptive title of this talk is this: Everything I Know About Leadership, I Learned from Sports Movies. How leadership manifests in each of us is a combination of personality, intentionality, and practice, not unlike sport. And for me, viewing leadership through the lens of sport grounded me in a way that honored my vocation while providing an arc to my own development. So today I want to share some of the leadership lessons that have shaped me through the lens of an important part of my life: sport. We begin with a quote from the greatest sports movie of all time. And I'm sure we could have some debate about that. "I want to announce my presence with authority. Nuke LaLoosh, Bull Durham." Nuke LaLoosh is a hot young pitcher who doesn't take direction from his catcher very well. My first leadership experience came as captain of my high school field hockey team. I was woefully underprepared for the role. Leadership was thrust upon me, and I had no idea what to do with it. At the end of practice one day, my coach, Mr. Vincent, pulled me aside, handed me a piece of paper, typed on the top of the page, yes, typed, 10 qualities of a good captain. I can't recite a one of them for you right now. But I knew in that moment that Mr. Vincent was telling me that I was not getting it done. That was about as subtle as he ever was. What fascinated me as a student of sport and as a young professional was that so much of the leadership that I observed was authoritarian, the Nuke LaLoosh school of leadership, you might say. Leadership was getting people to follow the rules or face the consequences. Didn't play well, you ran sprints. The paradox for me was that those leaders had teams or organizations that were successful. so I thought that's what leaders did. In my first senior level position at a university, I too wanted to announce my presence with authority. At the request of the president, I had a closed-door meeting with 3 students in response to some complaints we had received about some marketing they were using to promote a guest speaker. I handled it, or so I thought. About an hour later, my name and some partial facts of that meeting appeared on any number of conservative websites and blogs, accusing me of censorship and of suppressing free speech on a college campus. I went viral, thankfully before Twitter. The reaction was severe enough that I had a police escort to and from work for several weeks. I was even listed among the top 5 campus outrages that year. I was number 4. Many lessons came out of that experience, but the one I want to focus on is the fact that I let my ego get the best of me, and that I didn't take enough time to prepare for that interaction. I was authoritarian. Another quote from Bull Durham dovetails nicely here. The world is made for people who are not cursed with self-awareness. That has never been me. Self-awareness can help you understand and articulate how you show up in certain situations, but it can also be an obstacle to courage and bravery. Our next quote comes from a lesser-known but still really good sports movie, Clear the Mechanism, Billy Chappell in For Love of the Game. In the movie, Billy Chappell uses this self-talk tool to vacate his mind before throwing a pitch. The crowd is hurling slurs his way, and the batter is staring him down. As a sports psychologist, I love it. When you think about it through the lens of my own professional development, clearing the mechanism allows you to focus on the task at hand. It's a cue to engage self-awareness and block out the noise. We come back to planning, intentionality, and practice. So if the authoritarian leadership style wasn't for me, what was? Leadership can be approached as power over others, but the more effective leaders approach it as power with others. With more than a decade of my career spent as the guy behind the guy, I had power but little authority. I had a seat at the table but couldn't seem to be heard. And as a result, I struggled to be effective. And I took it all as a personal failure. Clearing the mechanism provided me with space to gain perspective, which I found was something that was critical to open up creativity and grow. My visual field opened, and I saw around me leaders who promoted great work, who brought out the best in the people around them and managed to have some fun along the way. I recognize that it's not about power at all. It's about influence and giving people space to do their best work. We now depart from the Kevin Costner theme and introduce Jerry Maguire. Help me, help you. The most famous line from this movie, show me the money. But there is so much more to this story. This line comes from near the end of a really wonderful conflict between Jerry and his egomaniac of a football player, Rod Tidwell. Rod wants a big contract. Unfortunately, he's not much of a teammate. An agent can't help a player if the player isn't part of the solution. A leader can't succeed if the people they're leading aren't on board. It brings me back to the question of how leaders who lead through fear are successful. 3 factors determine whether or not a group of individuals will become a team: unity of purpose, a shared vision, and experiencing a shared hardship. A strong leader becomes part of the team and strengthens that team by modeling the behavior desired by everyone on the team. Other leaders, though, because of the behavior being modeled, insulate themselves from the team, and the team achieves success despite the behavior of the leader. It comes down to the homespun idiom, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. None of us can do what we do without the people around us. Leadership is a conversation, and that conversation requires the active participation of the entire team. Effective leaders embrace the wisdom of those around them, recognizing that having a title doesn't mean you have all the answers. Organizations get better when the culture facilitates problem solving through trust, a little social capital building, and remaining open to possibilities. More than one time in my life, sometimes gently, sometimes not so much, I have been told to let go of my tendency toward perfection. Surprises y'all, right? Not only is it unrealistic, it's not any fun. An executive coach I worked with would respond to my recitations of attempting perfection with a Midwestern, "How's that working out for you?" That well-placed clapback always landed heavily on me, and it took me years to see beyond what were my dominant responses. One was that the work product needed to be perfect, and two, that I needed to do all the work. Leadership, including self-leadership, is learning from the past to inform the future. It's being willing to share responsibility and recognizing that imperfection is a reality. Each spring, I have the opportunity to read the names of some 700 graduates who walk across the stage at commencement. I am often asked, how do you read all those names? And my answer feels like the commencement equivalent of how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. After my first year of serving as reader, I reflected on the experience, which was thrilling. Had I held on to the expectations of perfection, I don't know that I would have had the courage to say yes when I was asked to take on that role. My fear of mispronouncing names would have prevented me from being willing to literally step up to the microphone. But pulling the threads forward of self-awareness and perspective, I knew that the main floor of the Mass Mutual Center was a familiar place to me. I played a number of high school basketball games on that court during high school, and what calmed me on the day of commencement was this. If I survived missing as many layups as I did on that floor, I could survive the prospect of mispronouncing a name. Nevertheless, I committed to my best effort and to saying each name boldly, lest anyone know I was unsure. The next leadership lesson comes from a well-known movie and brings us back to Kevin Costner. If you build it, they will come. Ray Kinsella from Field of Dreams. We all know this one, but I'm not talking about mowing down a field in Iowa. For me, this means listening to your inner voice, your gut, your intuition, to act in a way that is consistent with your values and beliefs. This means, critically, that you must be open to looking silly. Perhaps more related to self-leadership, my gut check moment came in 2012. I had moved to Destin, Florida, to pursue a bit of a career shift in executive search. By all accounts, I was successful. The downside was that I was about 1,200 miles away from my family, spending 3 to 5 days a week on the road, and not feeling rooted in the place I was living. I wasn't living my values. I made the decision to return to New England without a job and forced myself to consider the prospect of a career outside of higher education. My bosses thought I was crazy. My family was concerned. And even those who knew me well knew this was the riskiest decision of my professional life, but it felt right to me. And then my Bay Path story began. The last quote comes from a movie about a washed-up golfer who displays extraordinary stubbornness that is matched only by his talent with a 7-iron. When a defining moment comes along, You define the moment, or the moment defines you. Roy McAvoy in Tin Cup. A defining moment doesn't always come with fanfare and a cheering crowd. It can, quite often, sneak up on you. My defining moment came in March of 2016, standing on this stage. The university was gearing up for the NEASC site visit that was scheduled for a month later. It was the culmination of 18 months of work by hundreds in this community, and it was a process that I led. Dr. Leary asked me to make a few comments about it during the State of the University address. As I concluded my remarks, I wanted to thank everyone for their participation in the process, for making NEASC a priority amid all of our other priorities, and in many cases for literally picking up the phone when I called desperately seeking something. I realized it was my last chance to speak about NEASC publicly before the visit. As the thank you emerged, the tears started to fall. Here I am, crying on stage in front of everyone, and I could not stop. My dad asked, as I told him this story afterwards, were you crying or were you Kathy crying? I was Kathy crying. Turning to walk off the stage, I had a moment when I thought I was finished. How could people take me seriously? What followed surprised me. Expressions of support came from across the campus. A colleague came into my office and said, "You are human." At that stage of the process, I appreciated the reminder. The defining moment was not the tears. It was the realization that emotional authenticity is part of my leadership, and that vulnerability and showing that to those assembled in this room brought me more clarity than I could have imagined. Trying to be a leader the way someone else was didn't work for me. Crying on this stage gave me the courage to let my authentic self come through a bit more. Being vulnerable reframed a perceived weakness into a strength. Being vulnerable didn't diminish my voice or my leadership, it amplified it. Each of us has our own leadership playbook, and we develop a game plan by evaluating the demands of the situation and identifying the desired goal. Unlike sport, leadership is not a zero-sum game. The process of leadership is one that challenges me to find equilibrium between and among vulnerability, authenticity, and self-awareness. Vulnerability is an invitation. My goal is to continue to stretch my leadership legs and to own those things that make me, me. The sport-loving, movie line quoting, less reluctant leader. The journey continues.